doing out there? Hey, it's awesome to see you guys today. Super, super happy you could join us. We got a great one for you today, guys. I really think that this one is going to be game changing, history making. Who do we have joining us today? Well, we have the great Chief John Comparetto. John, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see you.
Pleasure.
Let me just give a short intro for those of you who might not know John. John Comparetto, 45-year veteran of law enforcement. He joined the New York City Police Department in 1973 and retired as a lieutenant in 1999. His last assignment from 1991 to 99 was the NYPD executive officer for the Joint New York Drug Enforcement Task Force. Oh, I got to ask you about that because we interviewed another person from that task force as well. John continued his career in New Jersey, where he was appointed chief of department for the Passaic County Sheriff's Department, where he retired in 2008. He has continued in law enforcement as part of an anti-terrorism analytical group for a sheriff's office in New York. And he's basically a high professional in law enforcement. But John joins us today for a slightly different reason. John, tell the audience why you're here today.
Well, we were talking about David Berkowitz, son of Sam. And Dave was a friend of mine as a teenager. And we'll discuss, you'll guide me through this, how I met Dave, but there's a lot of, rumors going around about Dave's childhood, bad childhood. And after discussions with Manny, I really wanted to set the record straight.
It's interesting that you say that, John, because now you knew David in Co-op City. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And it's very interesting that you say that because we just had, and I'm going to just play it for the audience. We just had another person from David's Co-op City's years join us, and I did a live interview with her. And this is, of course, Maria. And I wanted to just show an excerpt to the crowd of Maria's interview because while I was interviewing Maria, your name came up. Of course, I did not know you at this point, which is one of the things I think is really cool about this video series, John, is that we meet people and then from there we meet other people. And so far we seem to be getting a good smattering of the Co-op City crowd. What I find really, really compelling about your story is whereas Maria was a little younger and was not part of David Berkowitz's inner circle, inner crew. She was younger, she was a girl. You were actually one of his best friends, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, cool. So let's just see a little bit of Maria, and then I want to just get your take on Maria, and then we'll get started talking about you and Dave.
And I guess he told him that he had.
Whoops, give me a second here. Let me stop that. Share sound. Share. All right, so it's about a minute long excerpt, and I'm going to listen on these headphones because for some reason I can't.
And it just so happened that John lived next door to me and had two brothers. So there were three boys, and I had a crush on his younger brother.
Uh-oh, John.
So anyhow, these guys, Eddie, Lenny, Dave, John, when they wanted to get together, they would go past my apartment to see John. And they would knock on the door, and they would, like if they were ringing the intercom, sometimes it rang at my house,
right,
so I could hear them talking or whatever. The girls all wanted to come up to my room because I had the master bedroom, and we would try with glass cups and try to see if we could hear their conversations and stuff like that. But
anyway, so that's kind of interesting. Now, do you remember Maria?
I remember the net. Sure, I do.
So it seems like she had a crush on your younger brother there, which is kind of interesting. So John, talk to us first about Co-op City. How did you end up in Co-op City? Tell the audience a little bit about Co-op City as a place to live in those years, especially. And then we can get into how you met Dave and all that.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Ravenswood housing projects in Long Island City, Queens. It was tight. I was the oldest of three brothers. So my parents had a 2-bedroom apartment in Ravenswood. That meant they had a bedroom and the three of us had a bedroom. And now, of course, that's all they could afford at the time. And then they started building where Freedom Land used to be, Co-op City. So my parents actually had to borrow a few $1,000s to put a down payment down. And we were one of the first on the list. And as buildings opened, they'd move people in. Just so happens that building 6 that I was in opened, I believe, January of 1970. And we moved from the Bronx to Co-op City. Now we had a 3-bedroom apartment. My parents had a room. I had a room. My 2 brothers had to share a room. Parquet floors, central air conditioning. It was a really nice place to live when we moved there in 1970.
Right.
And in fact, I still have a friend of my parents who's in the 90s, still lives in building 7. She's
Really?
still there. Yeah,
In the
they
same
moved in.
apartment, huh?
She's been in her building 7 in the same apartment. But I also was a high school commuter. So even though I grew up in Queens, in Long Island City, my high school would have been Long Island City High School, LIC. But I had taken the test for Brooklyn Tech. So I commuted from Queens to Brooklyn every day. When we moved to Co-op City, it was a bit of an inconvenience, but I had my driver's license. I was 17 years old. I had taken driver's ed, and my parents gave me a car to use, and I commuted to Brooklyn Tech. So I really wasn't around Co-op City a lot in the beginning. I didn't know anybody, and all I did is went to school, came back. I'd lie to you if I told you I studied. So,
Hey, I was the same exact way. So that's interesting because Maria was also a person who was part of that first generation of people who moved into co-op. And she said that when she moved there, she didn't fall into friends right away, but she was still like wanted to move back to her old neighborhood and was kind of pissed off at her parents for moving her to Co-op City. But one of the things she realized pretty quickly was that there was a million kids around and it was very easy to make friends. Was that your experience?
no.
Oh,
My youngest brother came up one day and he said, "Hey, John, they got this little volunteer fire department on the ground floor of our building." He said, "I met the guys there." I said, "Well, I don't want to be a fireman. I want to be a cop." He said, "Well, they want to be cops, but they like, putting out fires. Why don't you go meet them? You'll make some friends." So I went down to the lobby. They had it was like it was a large room they had. It was in Co-op City. I'd let them use the room. I met the guys, and Marie had said the names. It was Dave, Ed, Lenny, Jeff, Herbie. She didn't mention Herbie. He was another guy.
right.
I was the oldest of the crew. I was 17. I had a driver's license. I think they were all 16, and Lenny was actually, I think, a year younger.
Okay.
Lenny might have been just turning 16, but I believe he was a couple of years behind us in school. I was a senior. Dave was a junior in high school, and the other guys were juniors in high school also. And we hit it off really, even though I didn't want to be a fireman, they were having a good time. They had built up this little volunteer fire department. Now understand, when a place like Co-op City is being built, there's dozens of fires every day and night in the construction areas. And they had a police scanner and a fire scanner. They had hoses, they had tools, they had helmets. I don't know where they got them, but they got them. And they would hear a fire come over in one of the construction areas by a building. Before me, they go running over there. Now I had a car where they can put everything in the trunk of my car. So we'd go over, put out the fire. The fire department would come and they would check it to make sure it's out and thank us. They had no problem with us doing that. I guess they were busy enough.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a different time period. Right now, you'd be sued to oblivion. You'd have every right.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Right,
So,
right.
so David was already hanging out with. Now, did you call him Dave? Is that just like Maria? Did you call him Dave?
Yeah, I knew him as Dave. Yeah.
As Dave. Okay, so I'll call him Dave. So everybody out there in the audience, when we say Dave, we're referring to David Berkowitz. And just also real quick for subscribers out there, I just want to let you know that we have a Zoom in feature. If you want to get in on today's conversation and ask John a couple questions, that's totally cool. Nobody Zoom in just yet, though. We're not ready for you. We're going to do it towards the end. I'll give you guys definitely fair warning. There's several people already in the waiting room. So I'll announce who's coming on. You'll get all ready and we'll talk about that. So Dave was already then close and friends with these guys when you first met them and you kind of just fell in with them.
I did. we were really inseparable. After school every day, we were together. We were
Right.
together all the time.
And so what was do you remember your first impression of Dave? Anything that stood out about him, his personality?
No, I mean, he was one of the guys. He was no different than everybody else. He was doing okay in school.
Hmm.
What I can tell you is I had already known that I wanted to go into law enforcement,
Right.
and so did Dave. And I'll go a step further. I had the car, and I never did a drug, and Dave never did a drug. I'm not sure I can say that about some of the other guys there. As far as smoking a joint or something.
Right. It was the
But I
70s.
used to tell them, listen, do not ever get into my car with any drugs, because I know what happens. You get pulled over, and now you slip it out of your wallet, you throw it on the floor, and when the police find it, everybody gets arrested unless the guy admits that it's theirs. So Dave was exactly like me. He no drugs, didn't do any kind of he was straight as an arrow. He was shy. I'm going to tell you, he was probably a little more shy than the rest of the guys.
Hmm.
But there was nothing otherwise that stood out about him.
But when you say shy, it wasn't like he was socially awkward and like a total recluse. He was just
No,
a
not at
little.
all. Not at all. I have a cute story to tell you.
Tell him.
Whenever, huh? Tell it.
Yeah, tell it now.
So sometime during this time period, January 70 through June of 71,
Okay.
I don't remember exactly when, there was a young girl, I'm going to say 15 or 16, that apparently was very promiscuous. She lived in Co-op City, and there was rumors of her doing her thing on the buses coming back from school,
Whoa.
really promiscuous, okay?
Hmm.
And one day, I don't even want to say her first name. One day, Dave came up to me, and he was like a little giggly, and he says to me, I got to talk to you. I said, everything okay? And he says, yeah, it's okay. And he's like, he wants to ask me something, but he was embarrassed to ask me. And he said to me, don't you carry a condom in your wallet? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, I need to borrow it. And I said, yeah, right.
Borrow it.
Yeah. I said, you mean borrow it and then give it back to me? No, you're not getting it back. So I said, well, can I ask you, like, why all of a sudden do you need this? And he brought up that young girl who was pretty promiscuous. He said, I'm going to be with her in her apartment at 5:00. So I said, yeah, okay. So I took it out of my wallet. I gave it to him. About 7:00, he came downstairs to the firehouse room there, and he was all smiles. And I said, let me have it back. He said, no, I can't. I said, why not? He says, I used it. I said, oh, God, Dave, please don't tell me you used it. He said, why not? I said, I only carried that as a goof. I had punctured that full of holes. I said, that was my goof thing I carried. You didn't really use it, did you? And he almost broke down into tears. And every day for about 2 weeks, he would seek me out, and he'd cry to me that, John, please tell me you're joking. Please tell me that was a real one. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to admit to him that it was real, that there were no holes in it. But like any other guy, he took it the way anybody else would. So, he was a normal kid.
So there were no flashes of anger.
No.
All of a sudden, darkness comes over him and all that kind of stuff.
No, that's all nonsense. So all those stories you heard about him and any involvement he had, he did not have during that time period. None at all.
Now that actually brings me to my next point. Speaking of, misconceptions and people who don't know Dave talking about him as their authorities on it, I wanted to play you something here. This is the Reverend Don Dickerman, who probably quite a few people out there in the audience know. And he ministered to David Berkowitz. I think he was one of the main ministers that helped Berkowitz in his conversion to Christianity, which we can discuss later if you care to. But I wanted to show you this excerpt because this is Don Dickerman, a man who did not know David, in high school, and here he is talking about David in high school. And as a person who knew David, in fact, you said that you were inseparable. I wanted to see if this description jibes with your reality, and which it should start right now.
He had loving parents. Yeah, David's parents loved him and did the best they could, but he was a troubled child from birth. He told me stories about preferring darkness to light, and how he would, as a child, get under the bed and hide just because he preferred darkness, get in the closet and hide. And he said, I would turn things over, go into tantrums. He said, I was out of control. He also told me it was a miracle he made it through high school because he was in trouble all the time. And he was tormented. David was, without doubt, a demon-possessed individual.
All right. Well, what's your opinion about what Don Dickerman just said about David in high school?
Never saw any indication of anything he's saying. When guys are together, when you get in trouble, you talk about it to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, I have no knowledge of him being in trouble. I have no knowledge of him liking darkness. As far as his parents, I can tell you this, he was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it could have been around the time I met him, maybe a short while before. His adoptive mother, I believe, had passed away. And the adoptive father remarried. And Dave used to tell us, he didn't like that. He didn't like that his father had remarried. But that was the extent of it. Never any talk about under the bed. He was fine. He was, when we get to it later, to 1977,
Mm-hmm.
I'll make you laugh on just how different these stories appear to my knowledge of him.
Right. And this is exactly what the experience Maria had, where she knew Dave to be just the nicest guy. Yeah, a little shy. She described him pretty much the same exact way you did, but no darkness, no torment,
No,
no
none.
demon possessions in high school.
Absolutely not. No,
So
absolutely not.
to me, it's crazy that this guy's speaking like this, completely out of turn. He didn't, and this guy, Don Dickerman, is helping to form public opinion of this guy, of David Berkowitz. So getting back before we get to, him graduating high school in the Army. So here he is, he's coming to you for a condom. He's clearly interested in women. He clearly doesn't have really much trouble. I mean, yeah, the girl was promiscuous, but like, what was his deal with girls and women? Did you see him date anybody? Did he have any psychopathy?
A lot of time has gone by, but I remember a young lady named Iris he had as a girlfriend. I couldn't tell you the time period,
Mm-hmm.
but it had to be before he went into the service. So it was during the time that we were all together. He had, again, he was a little shy, but he liked girls. We talked about girls. No, there was nothing else I can tell you negative. There was nothing negative.
It's interesting that you bring up Iris, because here is an article. I think it's from the Daily News, Tuesday, August 16th, 1977. And it says here, in the frozen hills of Korea, around a girl he could never have, love was not returned. And even you could see from the way they're writing this article, it's all about how he couldn't get a girl and how his love wasn't returned, as if that's somehow like weird that people across the world wouldn't have continued a relationship. But there it is, Iris Gerhardt, his high school sweetheart. What was Maria told us a little bit about that relationship, but do you remember it in any detail?
I don't. I do not remember it. Nope. I remember the name.
Mm-hmm.
Let's also remember that newspapers, their job is to sell newspapers.
Right.
And I can promise you, after my long career in law enforcement, I've been involved in things, and I read it in the paper the next day, and I said, "Who's that?" It wasn't. I was there. I was involved.
Right.
It didn't happen.
Right.
So, and 1977, and after he was captured and everything. Everybody becomes an expert, and they'll just print whatever's going to sell newspapers.
Right.
So, unless they actually have letters, and one of our friends has never got rid of the letters he sent. I have a lot of letters that he sent me from the military that I, of course, got rid of way back then.
That's what Maria said.
Unless somebody has them, it's all a bunch of bull.
Right. And we'll talk about these letters when, like, I want to just carry on a little bit more about his life as a teenager before graduating high school. So did you ever meet his parents? Were you ever up in his apartment?
Sure, I did. They were regular, normal people. In fact, my parents really, really liked David. They liked Dave. He was always around. My parents used to say, what a nice, respectful boy and everything.
Hmm.
So he was very well liked. My parents really liked. At one point, before he went in the military, he had asked me, you think your parents would let me move in with you? Because he was pissed off at his father remarrying.
Okay.
It couldn't happen. I mean, we were fortunate to have 3 bedrooms and I had my own bedroom finally. So it just wasn't going to happen. And then he, couldn't wait to join the military.
Right. Now, so he hears that he's adopted. Popular culture says that this was the time of his change. When he hears he's adopted, all of a sudden he goes into this dark, brooding period and, starts to have these weird fantasies. So you were there when he found out he was adopted. What was
He had found out before I was there, and there were
right.
no fantasies. He already knew. I mean, when I met he had told me, I was adopted, my step, and he'd known for a while. And
Right.
when his adopted mother passed away, he was a little pissed. My father shouldn't have got married so fast, but
Right.
not to the point of I'm going to get even, anything like that. He just didn't like it. He
And
didn't like that.
and you saw him interacting with his parents. Was it
Yes,
like what was that like?
normal parent son interactions.
Was
There
there
was nothing.
any
No,
no fights, nothing crazy
no,
like that? I
absolutely
mean,
not. No.
everybody fights with their parents, but what I'm trying to find out here, because again, I mean, I'm not trying to paint this guy in any way. In fact, I'm totally accepting of the fact that this guy was a totally normal person in Co-op City, to the point where your parents said that he was respectable. Maria said he was the nicest guy, always was smiling and having like, what was his day-to-day personality like? Like, what were the things that he liked to talk about? Did he have any hobbies?
Well, funny you brought that up. He, along with all of us. So when I joined their little fire department, I had never really heard the term police and fire buff. It was
Mm,
something new to me, and I learned it. Now they had me go out and buy a blue light for my car so we can go to the fires a little faster in Co-op City,
mhm.
and that was fun. And then we would I mean, we'd be there every day after school, every single day, on
Right.
weekends, all day long. And then, we'd be listening to the scanner and a police call would come in and they'd say, let's go to that. And I'd say, what are we going to do? Like we don't have a gun or anything. And well, we started going to them and Dave was right there. Dave loved every minute of it. And
Interesting.
sometime the beginning of 1991, I guess, maybe late 70, I'm sorry, I said 91, 70. They talked me into buying my own police car because what we would see, we would go to these fire scenes, these police scenes, and we would bump into people that we knew a little older than us,
Uh-huh.
and they would be there with their own police car. And we'd look and we'd say, how did they do that? And they'd say, well, nobody cares. So like in late 70, I bought a 1968 New York State police car at an auction. Cost me like $2,000 maybe,
Uh-huh.
if that much. And I painted it black and we put a siren in it and we had the bubble light that goes on the dashboard or on the top.
Wow.
And I had a couple scanners in it and another police radio. And then every night we were running around the entire city of New York with the red light and the siren going to all these calls. And Dave and I'm not gonna, Lenny was the youngest of all. Ed was really into it. Ed's father had been a fireman in Engine Company 48 on Webster Avenue. Before I met him, his father died in a fire.
Mm-hmm.
He had a heart attack while on the roof of the fire.
God.
And so Ed, lived with his mother. I think his sister still lived there, but he was really into this. And they got me into it. And Dave was part of the crew. The whole time until 71, I can tell you, there wasn't a major fire or incident in the city of New York that we missed. And to this day, by the way, I know people still doing this.
Yeah.
So he was into it. Dave was into that.
This is interesting on several levels. Number one, I wonder, of course, like if anybody remembers Dave from back in those days showing up at fires, if he ever interacted with firemen and police, if he ever had any relationship with any firemen or police. Did you know of any? Or was it just we showed up and then we left?
Yeah, we showed up and we bump into people. Well, we left out something. So around the same time, we saw this emergency service truck going by, and it was an old truck, painted green, said New York City Police Department on it, and it said Auxiliary Police Rescue. So we went to the 405 precinct, and we found out it was volunteer, part of the auxiliary police program. They had all kinds of ropes and spotlights and ladders, and they would, when they were volunteering their time, they would respond to requests from uniformed services for any of that. If the real emergency service might not be available, might be too far away, we're tied up, and we all joined. Dave joined it. And then we actually found out that the 5-2 precinct had a very active unit. The 4-5 precinct wasn't active.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of us transferred. Dave did not transfer. And the guys who were running the 5-2 once told me, he's a little too quiet. We think he's odd. That's all they said. And there was no other indication. Okay.
Now
But
they
Dave-
told you this in real time, not 10 years later,
No.
reminiscing about the fact.
Well, really years later. Some years later, they brought it up. Some years later.
So was it after he was arrested?
I'm going to say, yeah.
Because
They
I'm
were
just
look-
wondering, like, how much of that was informed by their media
well,
saturation?
And I think a lot of it came back from the media saturation,
Right,
like, boy, are we glad we didn't transfer him type of thing, you know?
right.
But Dave was into all of this. That's, we spent a lot of time doing this stuff, and all the guys in the group wanted to be cops or firemen. They did. So
Now, what I find highly interesting, of course, is that this then places David with directly with a few things that he picked up knowledge-wise. He learned how to use a police scanner,
Mhm.
which we know as Son of Sam researchers, those of us out in the audience who know about the shootings, police scanners were used in these shootings, particularly in evading the police and finding out where the police were. So that's interesting that David, would you say that he was expert level in that?
Oh, sure.
Right. And then you had David, but David was also interested in becoming a policeman, which I find interesting. Because here's a guy who's into law enforcement. Presumably, he's also a fire buff. He's into helping people. That doesn't sound like the kind of person who's going to go later and start shooting people randomly in lovers' lanes. Obviously, something happened to him, which we will talk about to get your perspective on. But did he ever seem like he had a weird, perverse fascination with fire, or that he just
No.
got off on fire, or anything
Nope.
like that?
No, absolutely not.
Did
And
he have?
I've heard stories. People said, yeah, he was going around starting the fires in Corp City. No, he wasn't.
Right.
He was in that room with us the whole time.
Okay.
From the time we got out of school, we'd be in there till 9, 10 o'clock at night. And when fires came in, we were all together. So he was not starting fires during this period. No, was not.
Do you believe he was starting fires later?
Well, I've heard that. You mean after he came out of the military?
Correct.
Possibly, yes. Yes.
Right. So we'll talk about that a little later. So really, really interesting. So far, the picture that's emerging for me of David is of a nice, normal Jewish boy from the East Bronx. Didn't really hurt anybody. Didn't seem to have any darkness in his heart. Certainly wasn't tormented. Easily got along with girls. Easily got along with his peers, boys. Did he have any weird jealousy tendencies with other boys? Was he a bully to anybody?
No, but I just have to tell you, everybody knows him as a nice Jewish boy. I think his real name, his parents were Falco.
Right.
So he was a nice Italian boy who grew up Jewish.
I think he was half Jewish. I think his
Yeah,
mother.
yeah.
I think his mother was Jewish.
Yeah,
I think
I think so.
Yeah, I think her last name was Broder, and his father's was the Falco. But yeah,
Okay.
he's like me. I'm half Puerto Rican and half Jewish. I guess he was half Italian and half Jewish. Trying to think of a joke there. Can't come up with one.
Yeah, but you might get in trouble nowadays bringing up one.
It's all right. We're non-PC on this station.
Yeah.
John. So that's really, really excellent background information. Anything more about his, because I want to start easing into the end of high school, beginning of the military, and start getting into the Son of Sam era. Anything that we have missed in terms of his, 16, 17 years old before high school's over?
No, he was just a nice kid. He was a nice kid.
So then what happens once high school is over?
Dave was very pro-American, very patriotic. Dave could not wait to graduate high school so he can join the army and fight in Vietnam. That's what he wanted. He wanted to fight for his country. Told us all the time. So when he graduated, he signed up for the army, didn't get drafted, he signed up. And I drove him to Fort Dix when he enlisted.
No, wait, hold on one second, John, because some people say he signed up for the army because he was so angry at his parents for being divorced, for being adopted and not telling him. You're saying that
No.
that's not the case.
It's not the case. He wanted to fight for his country. He was very patriotic, and he talked to me all the time about he couldn't wait to go into the army. Because I had another option I had is I was very into the Air Force. I was flying a plane when I was 16 years old.
Oh, no kidding.
And I had talked about possibly going into the Air Force, and then I got interested in police work. But Dave wanted to go into the army, and he had talked about it. And the minute he graduated, he enlisted.
So no college for Dave. It was just
No.
army gung ho, and he wanted to fight.
Volunteered for infantry, got into infantry, volunteered for Vietnam, and we would be in contact with him in basic. He'd send us letters.
Uh-huh.
He volunteered for Vietnam, and they sent him to Korea. And that was the destruction of Dave Berkowitz.
Right there, the sending of him to Korea. Now let's get into that. Now you're saying that was the destruction. Was he pissed off at that choice in
No.
terms of going to Korea, like angry that he didn't go to Vietnam?
No, here's what he was angry at. He started mailing us letters, and he would mail them to myself, to Lenny. I think Jeff got some. Ed, he'd send us all letters.
Right. Ed was the one that warned Maria about Dave's letters.
Yes, and he started sending us letters, and it started out with, "The heck is wrong with this country?" He said, "I joined the army to serve my country. They send me to Korea." He said, "I'm on the demilitarized zone. The North Koreans will play games with us by firing a shot over the DMZ and trying to shoot a bottle of soda off, where we are, and have maybe some bottles of soda on the wall or whatever's there where they are. And every once in a while, a GI gets wounded." He says, "We are not allowed to load our guns because it'll cause a diplomatic incident." He said, "So they could shoot at us, but we can't shoot back." And it's really, really bothered him. And as time went by, he would write, I got a letter from him saying, "I had to start smoking pot just to calm down." I said, "It's not right what this country allows to happen here."
Mm-hmm.
And then I started getting more letters, and he started doing every drug you can imagine. Okay. He was doing LSD. He was doing coke. He was doing heroin.
Heroin.
He had tried heroin. He didn't get hooked on it,
Okay.
but he was doing a little of everything. And then suddenly the letters changed. And this is where Ed probably had a talk with Maria. The letters started becoming 7, 8, 9, 10 pages long. And all they did was preach the Bible. It would be, every word in the letter would be according to John, according to Michael, he'd have the
John and Michael.
sections of what's that?
Well, John and Michael are interesting names because those were the later the people he was allegedly involved with, John and Michael Carr.
Well, that's only a couple. He listed every section.
Yeah, I know.
Every saint.
Right.
And he started signing them Master of Reliance. He didn't even sign them Dave anymore after a while. So I kept getting these letters. Now, my family moved away in 72.
Mm-hmm.
We moved up to Rockland County. So I was out of touch with him. I did get a letter during his period in the army. I got a letter that he was being court-martialed. He had burnt down the military police barracks.
He burnt down the military police barracks.
Yes, we found that interesting. And then another letter came that he beat the charges, but they were going to discharge him with a less than honorable. So he didn't get dishonorable. He didn't get honorable. There's one right in between.
Uh-huh.
So he came home I don't remember if it could have been '03. I'm sorry, '03, '73. I don't remember exactly when he came home, but remember, I don't live there anymore.
Right.
And I'm working, waiting to go on the police department. And then I went on the police department in December of '73. So I really had no contact with him. But there is no doubt in my mind, the drugs, the burning out on the drugs was mind altering and changed everything about him. There was
Now, we actually have an example of his letters. I want to see whether this is familiar to you. Here's an example of exactly what you're talking about. This was taken from the Star Gazette, Elmira, New York, 16th August 1977. And it's bizarre if you look at this, and it even talks about Berkowitz's letters being studied. And it says here, love is question mark, death is question mark. I must close now because I can't think of anything else to say and I'm running out of paper. I can't wait till tomorrow. It's payday. I'll have to go out and get me some heavy acid and morphine. There we're talking, your morphine.
Yep.
So I can last out the month. Wish me luck. Hawks versus doves. Peace means whatever the question mark. LSD. Love, Dave, pleasure, smog kills kids, ecology. I mean, this is bizarre stuff. This is talking about LSD and doing morphine, and he's talking about environmentalism. Where was he learning this? Do you have any clue?
No, I mean, I know strange things can happen in the military, but I mean, we believed he became, and this is a term we used way back then, a Bible thumper, we used the term a Jesus freak. He can't have a normal conversation. So now he gets out of service. I'm upstate. I hadn't seen him again. The guys would tell me, Lenny, Ed, although Ed had moved already and gone. Ed had gone into the Coast Guard. He was out. No, Ed was gone from the Bronx. Ed was a Baltimore cop after the Coast Guard. But so Ed was gone already. Lenny, I think Herbie was still there. They would tell us that if you bumped into Dave, he would get right up to your face and start talking about verses from the Bible. And they used to tell me, if you looked in his eyes, they were glass. When you look in somebody's eyes and you can see right through the back of the head? That's what Dave was like. Nothing violent. It was all Bible. Everything was the Bible. And so
and I'm sorry, John, he never gave any indication as to who taught him this, where he was learning this from. Did he ever say to anybody, hey, I'm being experimented on in the military, they're doing these weird things to me?
Never said that. Never said that. So now, June 1975, NYPD is going to lay off 5,000 cops. I was one of them. And I had come back from court and they put me on a foot post on Fordham Road and Webster Avenue. I'm getting laid off the end of the month. And who do I see crossing Webster Avenue? Dave. I don't want to have a conversation with him. I could do without, the Bible right at that point.
Right.
I make a quick U-turn, hoping he didn't see me. And I hear, hey, John. So I turn around. Hey, Dave. He comes up and gives me a big bear hug. He picks me up. John, good to see you. I haven't seen you in years. He says, come on, let me buy you lunch. And there was a diner right across the street. So we go across the street, and another one of our buddies wasn't a Corp City guy, but he was involved with the Auxiliary Police Rescue and knew all of us. Another guy named John, who later became a Yonkers cop. John joins us for lunch. I got to tell you, Dave was very normal. And I said to him, you sound okay. And he said to me, look, I did too many drugs. He said, I really messed myself up. He said, I've been straightening myself up. He says, I know you're getting laid off, but he says, they got to hire you back sometime and then hire more cops. He said, I think he was working for the post office already at that point. And he said, I'm going to work, for the government. And whenever they hire, he said, I'm studying, I'll take the police test. And he says to me, hey, I got an apartment on Leidig Avenue. Why don't you stop by after work? I said, okay. So he gave me his address. After work, I went up to the apartment, and it was a very simple one room. He had a bed. He had a workout bench with a weight, barbell on it. He had a desk with a police scanner on it, police and fire scanner.
There's the scanner.
And he had a book on the desk, studying to be a New York City cop. And we had a conversation for about a half hour or so. Sounded like he did before he went into the military. There was nothing odd about him. And again, he admitted, he burnt out. He said, I messed up on drugs and everything. He talked about that when we were having lunch.
Right.
And I said, okay, hey, hopefully I'll see you. Good luck. And I went on my way. And that's the last time I had any conversation, any dealings with him until 1977. And don't laugh. I got a phone call 3:30 in the morning from a friend of mine. I think at the time he was still with the fire department. He went on to become a cop, but he was a dispatcher with the fire department. And one of the police fire buffs of a group of a lot of guys in the early 70s that we had met. And he says to me, hey, John, he says, they locked up Son of Sam. I said, that's great. Good news. Why are you waking me up at 3:30 in the morning? He said, he's one of your friends. I said, who? He said, take a guess. I named Jeff. I named Eddie. I named Herbie. I named Lenny. I never named Dave. And he said, you left somebody out. And I said, Dave? He said, yeah. I said, Dave is a Bible thumper, a Jesus freak. They don't kill people. Unbeknownst to me, and in my naivety, I didn't really know anything about cults. I didn't know that he had apparently joined a cult. And I was in shock because I thought he was, into religion. He was into Jesus. He was into preaching. And he had become he had gotten involved in a cult.
It seems like he took to cultism and Satanism as fervently as he took to the Jesus stuff.
Oh, apparently, yeah. Yeah.
Now, did you see that personality trait in him where he got really, really into something extreme like that? I mean, it doesn't sound like from the way you described him as a teenager that he exhibited those tendencies until the army.
And listen, heavy use of drugs changes people's minds and personality. Mm-hmm. I spent most of my career in narcotics, so I can tell you if you saw what goes on the streets and people and working people, non-working people, everybody. Drugs do funny things, and that really altered his whole mind and personality.
Right. Now, during the Son of Sam era, now you were what, a New York City policeman during Son of Sam?
I was laid off from the city during that period, but I was
off.
a detective. I was a detective upstate working undercover.
Okay. And did you have any intelligence during those years about Son of Sam? Was there any chatter going on that maybe it wasn't more than one person, or was there any ever cop talk about the case, looking at sketches and so on and so forth?
Well, I can tell you this, many sketches went out. None ever looked like him. And even after they arrested him, we had heard stories that there wasn't one shooter. We had heard these stories, and the fact that, now understand something.
Who's we? You in the police department, or just we as a society?
Me and other cops working in Rockland, my friends in the city, my friends from co-op. I mean, we would always kept in touch and talk. There was a major panic in the city of New York during this period.
Right.
People afraid to go out at night. People trying to hide the color of their hair. People not parking in lovers' lanes. I mean, he put the city into a panic, and none of the composites ever looked like him. None. I saw one after he was arrested that could be close. Understand this, an eyewitness is the worst type of witness in the world.
Okay.
I can tell you in the police academy, they used to do something that you'd have 50 people in your class, and the instructor standing in the front, and there were two doors into the room, one on the right, one on the left. And all of a sudden, the right door would open up and two people would come in screaming, and one had a gun apparently filled with blanks. And they're yelling at each other, and the one guy is shooting the other guy as they're running out the door. And as he closes the door, everybody's just sitting there, and the instructor says, okay, write down everything you saw, including a description and what they said. And it was 50 different stories.
Right.
Eyewitness is horrible. That's why, cameras are the best thing nowadays,
Of course. I always say that Son of Sam could never take place now because of all the cameras that we have.
Right. Although it could take place now because everybody's wearing a mask.
That's true. That they didn't think this mask thing through. I mean, no wonder crime was gone up that and a million other reasons.
Nothing matched. We were convinced, and even after he was arrested, my friends, fellow law enforcement people, that he was not the only shooter.
But why did you think that if as you just said, the composites didn't really mean much, the sketches didn't really mean much?
Well, often they would look similar, maybe, or something close to him. But also, he admitted to all the shootings except a couple of them, two or three of them. Why would he not admit to them? There's no reason. He knew when he got caught, he spoke freely. He admitted to everything he did, and he wouldn't admit to a few of the shootings. And when he was asked why, if you didn't do it, who did it? He said, I can't tell you. And they asked him why not. He said, because they'll kill my family.
Right.
Now, the city of New York wanted this panic to end. They knew that the cult had moved out west. They knew this because once he was arrested, they started, a heavy investigation, everything else.
Right.
I had heard a story back then, and only more recently confirmed pretty much what I heard. I had heard a detective would not give up on this. And the detective on his own time went out west, and the city fired him. That's a story I heard.
We're talking about Detective Hank Chinotti, a guy who I've
Well,
interviewed.
That's right. I had never confirmed it. And then I watched this special on Netflix, and there was a detective who had become friends with Berkowitz while he was in jail, and would go interview him. And apparently, I think he leaked a little something to the press, and they arrested and charged him. This is way back then.
Uh-huh.
And it fit in with the reason they wanted this panic to end. As far as they was concerned, there was one shooter, nobody else involved. Now, I mean, Davis said he should never get out of prison. He knows what he did, but he still has not admitted to those several shootings.
Right.
So there was one person.
So at the time of the arrest, you were not convinced that Dave was the only shooter, is what you're saying?
No, I mean, we didn't really know. In law enforcement circles, we were talking, and there was a couple shootings where you couldn't go from the Bronx to Brooklyn in that short amount of time. The time frames didn't match.
Mm-hmm.
You could do it with no traffic, speeding, never hitting a red light, maybe.
Right.
But there were things, and everybody was looking at this, trying to figure this out, and it just didn't match. So we personally felt after his arrest and after looking at everything that he was guilty. He did a load of the shootings, but he wasn't the only shooter.
And did you ever follow up on that, or was it something that just did you ever read The Ultimate Evil, and did you ever get into all these stories?
I had not.
Mm-hmm.
Only recently, you and some other people. I mean, I knew there was the book out from the author, from Maury. What was his name?
Maury Terry.
Maury. Yep. I knew he devoted his life to trying to, working on proving this.
Right.
And about 2 or 3 years ago, I lose track of time, I was contacted by an investigative reporter. I think he was independent himself. And he asked me if he could, they were looking to put together a series, not the one, I don't believe, that's on Netflix right now.
Mm-hmm.
And he came and interviewed me for about an hour, and actually gave me some information. I don't know if you want to get into it on this, about a place where members of the cult might be right now.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Tell us.
In Utah. Well,
Uh-huh.
he gave me some information that I found very interesting, and it fit locations. He said to me that they have some very reliable information that some members of the cult were working in Friends of, what the heck's the name of it? It's a
Best Friends.
Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Utah.
Yeah.
And that they were either volunteers or employees there, and that they were doing things in the back of the woods with animals, sacrificing animals.
Really?
And yes, and they said that they had an informant who came forward to them and actually asked me, would you be interested if we can get the networks to buy our show? We want to do a number of specials. Would you be able to conduct an undercover investigation and put somebody in there, either as a volunteer, which they would pay, or as an employee? And that was my specialty in narcotics. I mean, as a sergeant, lieutenant, we did a lot of undercover stuff. And I said, that would be no problem. And apparently it never got picked up. So it definitely wasn't the guys with this special on there right now.
Uh-huh.
I watched that special, and they were pretty accurate. A lot of the stuff was pretty accurate. And when I saw about that detective, I said, oh boy, because that was like a dead issue. I'd never heard it again, never confirmed it.
Right.
that confirmed basically it wasn't that he was just fired. They arrested him. You know,
Right.
they wanted this to end. They didn't want this to go any further. You know, Dave became a bad guy. No doubt about it. You know, but all the stories you hear about him, you know, childhood problems, fighting in school, it's all nonsense. Dave
Right.
was like, if we were back in 1970, 71, and Dave was sitting talking to us, he's one of the guys.
Right. He
You
actually
know,
seems like one of the guys now. Have you ever watched any of his more modern YouTube videos?
I saw something where he was interviewed, yeah, and you could still see, you know, when somebody's under heavy therapy, I can
Mhm.
usually pick it out. You can
Okay.
see he's been involved in a lot of therapy and everything. And, you know, I know he's a preacher now and in prison. And, but he's actually said, I should never be released for what I did.
Right. I mean, to
You
me,
know,
that actually rates as some that he has some sort of knowledge as that he did wrong here in some
yeah,
capacity.
yeah.
So showing that he's probably not a psychopath or a sociopath, although who knows? I mean, I'm not quite sure what those terms even mean.
Well, I think the use of drugs and the joining the cult turned him into a psychopath and sociopath. Um, with, you know, with all the treatments and everything in prison, he could live out a normal life in prison, you
Right.
know,
Right.
but he surely was not the person we knew.
So you sound like you're pretty convinced that the cult story was true, that he did involve himself up in Yonkers with some cult people doing the sacrifices in the woods, and that you don't believe he did all of the shootings. Is that correct? That
Yes,
you're on
correct,
and
correct.
and how did you come to this knowledge, this feeling? Because you said you didn't read The Ultimate Evil. Was it just talking to your buddies in the police force? And how'd you even find out about this cult and all that stuff?
After he was arrested, I have some of my friends who were friends with Dave. Um, one in Yonkers PD, one who at the time was with the fire department, went on to become a police officer. Um, they were also, Yonkers had a lot of information after the arrest.
Uh-huh.
Now there was a Yonkers cop whose name, who we knew, he was friends with us. I'm just going to call him Pat for now. Okay.
Okay.
You're welcome to give out his name if you want.
The audience knows who he is. In fact,
Okay.
we've mentioned his name before.
Okay. Well,
I might as well, do you want me, do you not want me to say it, or?
no, I have no problem. Go ahead.
Okay, let me just share the screen with everybody. So who John is about to speak about is this guy right here. And this, of course, comes from the Detective Rothstein files that we exposed a few months ago. And it's right here, Yonkers Police, Patrick O'Shaughnessy. Is that who we're talking about?
That's Pat. Yep. Yep. So Pat was also a buff. Back in the early 70s, Pat had his own police car. Pat had, before he became a cop, Pat had his red light, his scanners and everything, his radio.
He was from the
right.
Bronx? Like, how'd you know him in 1970?
He was involved with the rescue unit in the 5-2. He had got involved with the auxiliary police rescue. I don't recall. I think he was Bronx. I do know at one point he lived in Riverdale. I'll tell you that story in a minute. Again,
Okay.
Odd fellow. Pat was, you know, a nice guy, a little odd. Pat, at 17 or 18, enlisted in the Marine Corps. And he was in basic training only a short while. And his father became very sick. And he got discharged from the Marine Corps. Pat went on to become a Yonkers cop. Now, during the investigation, friends of mine were seeing Pat at the shooting locations like really early. They were seeing him driving around, and he just happened to be by some of the shooting locations before the shootings. Or
Wait,
immediately.
hold on. Now
Go
you're
ahead.
blowing my mind. Now you're
Go
blowing
ahead.
my mind, John.
Go
You're
ahead.
saying that people saw John at the Son of Sam shooting scenes.
Pat.
Sorry. Pat, before the Son of Sam, at the Son of Sam shooting scenes, before the shootings.
Or shortly thereafter. They'll remember he was a buff riding around the Bronx, riding around the city and everything.
Mhm.
But he was seen, and my friends saw something, and they started to follow him. And they didn't like what they were seeing. Okay. Now, after the arrest of Son of Sam, after the arrest of Dave, I don't remember how long after, year, two, I don't remember. They convinced, I think, the Queens DA to open up and look into the cult.
Yes, that was Maury Terry's doing.
Yep. Well, the Queens DA contacted Yonkers that they wanted to interview Pat. Pat walked into police headquarters and said, look, when I was 18, I had enlisted in the Marine Corps and I had to leave. They gave me a discharge because my father was sick. They just called me back. I have to leave. And he left Yonkers and disappeared.
And
So
that doesn't sound believable to me.
it's not. But and no, they didn't call him back. He literally disappeared. He never went back to Yonkers. He moved out of state, and his name did pop up. Friends say also he was popping up. Remember, they're riding around the Bronx. These friends of mine. I'm now a cop, and when this was going on, I'm a cop upstate, laid off from the city. I'm married. I'm not
Right.
coming down running around the city. Plus, once you become a cop, you don't have to run around anymore. You do enough running around,
Right.
especially in the Bronx where I work.
Uh-huh.
But they were seeing O'Shaughnessy, and they suspected him starting fires also. They suspected him starting
Interesting.
fires. They were seeing him around. And I had my own friends were like watching him, and his name was popping up in places. So he suddenly disappeared. Now, am I accusing him of anything? Absolutely not. Am I saying he was quite odd and somehow involved somewhere with the cults? Possibly, yes.
So
But yeah.
this is highly interesting. So you have two guys from the Bronx. You have Dave Berkowitz and Pat O'Shaughnessy, and they're from the opposite sides of the Bronx, but somehow they're getting together in this nexus of auxiliary policing.
Mhm.
And so did people know for a fact in your circle that Berkowitz knew O'Shaughnessy?
Oh yeah, yeah, they knew each other. Sure.
So they
And
definitely knew each other,
yes,
because
yes.
that's speculated about so far in Son of Sam circles, but no one's ever come forward and said for absolute sure that O'Shaughnessy and Berkowitz knew each other.
No, they knew each other. And I'll tell you another O'Shaughnessy story just to show the little odd. He was living in Riverdale. He was a cop in Yonkers, and he called 911 in the Bronx that he had multiple shots fired into his apartment. And the police got there, and of course, my friends got there because they were police buffs and they knew his address too. And they got there, and the police determined that the shots did not come from the outside; it came from the inside.
God.
But let it die because he was a cop. Just let it die. They just put it down as suspicious, shots fired, and let it die. My friends who were there told me that they had determined the shots had come from the inside. He was shot out his own window and made a call that he was being fired upon for whatever reason,
God.
attention, whatever, and it never went anywhere. But he was a little bit odd. He was odd.
So someone had so I wonder, like, I'm not going to say that they could have prevented a Son of Sam shooting, but the word is actually that Patrick O'Shaughnessy was a dead ringer for a guy named John Carr, one of the Sons of Sam Carr. And a lot of people say that in the Son of Sam shooting, the one Lomino Damasi, the one on the stoop in Queens. See, not all Son of Sam shootings, John, were lovers' lanes. Quite a few
Right.
of them
Right.
weren't. Right.
Right.
Another popular myth that I don't know where that even came from. But some people posit that it was actually O'Shaughnessy that shot those two women on the stoop of their home in Queens, and not John Carr. What did O'Shaughnessy look like? Did he have a part in his hair that went off to the side?
Now you're asking an old guy a tough question.
You don't look that old to me.
Plus, remember, we're talking 50 years ago. Okay. He was thin. He was nice shape, thin. I couldn't tell you his hairstyle. It's
His
been
hairstyle.
so long.
Right. And
Yeah,
as we know, eyewitness accounts are not
right. Exactly.
So now there's a third guy. I want to start pivoting towards Zoom because, boy, we're coming up on an hour, having a great time. But I do want to come up on our Zoom. But there was another guy who I want to discuss, because you and I, in prepping for these shows, discussed the third guy who was involved with Berkowitz here, and possibly even O'Shaughnessy, correct? And that's this guy, Howard Weiss.
Well, only recently have I heard anything like, involvement. Now, I have no knowledge of him and Dave Berkowitz knowing each other. Howie was the lieutenant of the auxiliary police rescue in the 5-2. He was a good guy. He was a hard worker. I mean, he was just a good guy, Howie. Um, I have no knowledge. I mean, he knew who Dave was because Dave had wanted to transfer in and never transferred in.
Mhm.
Now, O'Shaughnessy, yes, knew him. In 50 years, I never heard Howie's name come up as having anything to do with this. So, I'm shocked that his name was during people and writings and authors looking into this. I just have no knowledge of Howie being involved.
He was in The Ultimate Evil in Maury Terry's book. Maury Terry, if I'm not mistaken, had O'Shaughnessy, Weiss, and Berkowitz all going to some wedding of a friend of theirs in, I believe, in Maryland. Did you ever hear of someone getting married in Maryland?
Ed got married. He was a cop in Baltimore. They could have been going down to Ed's wedding.
Did Ed know Howard? Howie?
Oh yeah, sure, he knew him.
And Ed knew Pat?
Okay, let me think about this now. Boy, you hit me with a tough one here. I went to Ed's wedding. I really don't recall. I don't know. I don't know that Ed would have known Howie well enough that Howie would have gone to his wedding. I'll tell you, my other buddy John from Yonkers, who I'm pretty sure also went to the wedding. He would know, and I'm going to have to ask him that question. But I just don't remember.
We absolutely need to talk about this because this is major, because you're providing a lot of color now to people who we've never even, Pat O'Shaughnessy, people have hardly even heard of. I believe in The Ultimate Evil, Maury Terry had a pseudonym for him, Peter Shane. That was the pseudonym for Patrick O'Shaughnessy.
I remember that name. Yeah.
Right. And Howie Weiss was in The Ultimate Evil as a friend of Berkowitz's and O'Shaughnessy. And of course, Howie Weiss in The Ultimate Evil meets a foul ending. What was that all about? Do you remember what happened to Howie?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was a shock to me and my friends too. Apparently, Howie was shot and killed in a homicide by a gay lover in bed. And that was a shock to us. Now, whether he was gay or not, nobody cared, but nobody even knew. I mean, and the fact that he was shot and killed was a total shock to us. But I really, to the best of my knowledge, I have no knowledge of him dealing with Berkowitz. O'Shaughnessy, yes. Mm-hmm. But with Berkowitz, let's remember, I moved in 72 up to Rockland. I was finishing college. I wasn't involved with the auxiliary rescue, wasn't involved with Dave. So could this have taken place from, well, no, Dave was in the military already. Unless this occurred after Dave came out of the military. Before 71, I would doubt that Howie had no knowledge of Howie being involved with Berkowitz. He did definitely know O'Shaughnessy.
He definitely knew O'Shaughnessy.
Yes.
O'Shaughnessy.
Yes.
And what was O'Shaughnessy's general reputation? I mean, I know we talked about him kind of being a live wire, kind of nutty. I mean, any other thing that we remember about him?
No, that's all. I mean, that's all I remember.
All right, cool. So listen, and we're gonna, I just want to put out to the audience out there that we're going to start Zooming soon. Gary, I want you to get ready. And then I want John Catalano to get ready. And then we're going to go to Ralph Dude after that. So just give them a little time because there's a slight delay here. So I had, so it's interesting that you don't believe that Berkowitz acted alone and that you have, these suspicions, but you never like took it any further. Do you ever have conversations with friends now about it? And do people in law enforcement circles still talk about this case?
Sure we do. And everyone I talk to says Dave wasn't alone.
Right.
Everyone I speak to.
Would you have any interest in speaking to Dave, or?
That's interesting. I've been asked that.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, would I want to take a ride to the prison and see him? Would he even remember? Let's remember, he burnt his mind out.
He's
You know,
he's gonna remember. I guarantee it. He's gonna remember.
I that investigative news team had asked me if I would go speak to him, and I said, if it worked out for us, I mean, I could. I don't know, he's not going to tell me anything he wouldn't tell others.
Right.
He's still secretive about who did some of the shootings. Although when I watched that special, he did tell people, he did admit to somebody being in the van at one of the shootings or by the van.
Or there was a van where somebody was filming the shooting.
Yes, exactly. And he
Right.
did admit to some of the names there. And that I thought was pretty new. I don't know if that was new or not, but
It wasn't new to us in the Son of Sam community,
Okay.
but yeah. But a lot of his interviews with, I'd actually be interested in your professional opinion of Maury Terry's interviews of Berkowitz, because the general consensus is that they're very leading. The witness. Hold on one second. Let me just mute this guy. They're very leading the witness, that Maury Terry essentially gives him the answer that he wants to.
I watched that and that came to mind. I saw after some of Maury's interviews, the former chief of detective who was the captain on the lead person on the Son of Sam case. He
Right.
said it's all nonsense. He was leading the witness. He was putting words in his mouth. It's a tough call. I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
It could have an appearance in a court. It probably would have been a problem in a court of law. It
Right.
could have an appearance of leading the witness, as the chief said, but I don't know. I don't have a professional response on that.
So real quick, John, if you can hear me, let's get you unmuted and let's get your audio. Make sure that your audio is off, because we're going to get an echo delay. So just make sure all that's taken care of. No, I'm sorry, John Catalano, the guy
Okay.
meeting us. Sorry,
Okay.
I forgot there's two
Yeah.
two Johns we're speaking about. John, let's get you unmuted and let's get your question. Hold on.
Okay.
Hey, John, how are you, sir?
Hey, how's it going?
Good,
Question
good.
for John. Does John remember if Berkowitz used to bring around a kid they would call Eggs?
I don't remember. I don't remember anybody with that nickname. What year are we talking? Are we talking 70, 71?
I'd imagine so. His parents supposedly owned a bakery.
Egg's parents owned the bakery.
Correct.
Yes. In fact, that bakery was on Buer Avenue. Did you know of some bakery that David was
No.
friends with a guy named Eggs?
I don't remember that name. I don't know the bakery. No, I don't.
And my other question, basically, I think you answered. As a child, you were saying Berkowitz did not start fires.
At least during the period I was with him, 70 through the middle of 71. And really, a bunch of us were together all the time. And I had no knowledge or thoughts of him starting fires. No, not during that period.
The reason I ask, because there was published a log that he kept of fires and the responses to his fires, and it was in the several hundreds of fires. So I was just wondering, how he would be able to do all that and nobody ever knew about it.
Yeah, well, again, I've heard that. I haven't seen the log, and I don't know the time frame in that log. I can only tell you that during that, I'm going to say an 18-month period where we were all together, we were together all the time. I don't know how we could start a fire, come back to the office, wait for the scanner, and then go without us knowing that he was out there. We'd be all in the office for an hour or two, and a fire would come in and we'd go. Now, does that mean he wasn't starting fires? Absolutely not. I just don't have any knowledge or recollection of him or an opportunity when we were all together for him to start those fires.
And last but not least, do you have any information on the two women he stabbed at Co-op City?
Allegedly stabbed. I don't believe that actually happened. Do you have any insight into that?
Never heard of it. Never heard it. And this would have happened after the military, after he came out, or before?
Yes,
Yeah, no,
after the
I have no information. I never heard that either. Never read or heard that. No.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
All right, Mr. Catalano, we really appreciate it. And I'm only calling you Mr. Catalano because I don't want to confuse the two Johns. So if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Catalano, seeing yourself out. And we're going to get Ralph dude in here. Ralph, please unmute yourself and any questions you have for our esteemed guest.
Catalano, we really appreciate it.
Oh, and please, Ralph dude, turn off your audio. So there we go.
Is it working?
That's good. Now we
Yes.
don't have the delay anymore. Thank you, Ralph. How you doing?
Good. I just wanted to say awesome show tonight. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
The auxiliary police angle to the whole case has never been looked at in this level of detail before. That's really huge and really interesting. You did have a mind-blowing moment when you're talking about the Yonkers cop there. I think his name is O'Shaughnessy. That was really fascinating stuff.
I found that to be very fascinating because we've never had any insight into this guy before. Carry on, Ralph.
You know, and just among other things, you know, I picked up on that I thought was interesting was the discussion of the Best Friends Animal Society. You know, and because that's the first time I've heard anything about the Best Friends Animal Society that made me think there was something to it. You know, if there's this kind of information out there, but I guess you know, the main question that I just wanted to ask is, you know, on a personal level of knowing David Berkowitz, was there ever any possibility that he may have been gay or on a, you know, potentially involved in kind of a, you know, gay relationship, even if he was going to be kind of pressured or bullied into it? Because there is a kind of big gay angle, I would say, among many of the characters that we come across in the you know, kind of investigation that Manny's been doing, people that show up in the Rothstein files, in the Maury Terry files, people, you know, particularly like Sidon and Ace Brown, who were, you know, kind of identified by allegedly by David Berkowitz, and who linked to the broader criminal underground in New York City at that time. And, you know, you had mentioned a homicide involving a gay relationship earlier, and I was wondering if you ever thought that was a possibility, or if that's something you would just completely discount.
If it was there, there was absolutely no indication. Also, the other part of our group, you know, Lenny, Jeff, Herbie, Eddie, I don't remember what year Co-op City first opened. Now, I was building 6 and we moved in January of 70. So I'm going to guess in 69 maybe is when they first opened.
You know,
And
on a personal level of knowing David Berkowitz.
Hold on one second. Guys who are in the waiting room, please still mute yourselves. I'm sorry. John, carry on.
So they knew him longer than me. They had established this little fire department, and there was never any indication. There were no signs, no indication. Like I said, he borrowed a condom from me.
Right.
He had a girlfriend. Now, it doesn't mean he couldn't be gay, you know, but there was never an indication of that.
Right. See, what's so interesting about this, and Ralph, great questions. If you wouldn't mind seeing yourself out, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Ralph, dude. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, guys. And
you're very welcome. Gary, you're going to be next, and then Eric. So please, Eric, keep yourself muted. Gary, don't unmute yourself yet. I do want to make one point for John's benefit here. So that question might have come out of left field for you, John. I don't know if you ever heard about gay stuff around Son of Sam and this homosexual underground, and you might have been like, well, what's this cat talking about? We got a whole bunch of files from Detective James Rothstein, who was NYPD Vice Squad. You might have heard his name. He's kind of a legend in this whole affair. And he was involved in an NYPD investigation called Operation Together, which was a look into the homosexual underground, the mafia control of gay bars. This was all in the early to mid 70s. And it was also, there was a component to that investigation, John, where they were investigating child trafficking and child pornography. And that's where it started to dovetail into the Son of Sam stuff. So in these files that Rothstein sent to us, there's a very interesting passage at one of them, and I'll send these to you via email. We can talk about this further. where it says pictures identified by David Berkowitz. And there's a whole mess of names. You have Ben Rose, Shelley Seiden, Shelley Bloom, Seymour Seiden, all these very, very sort of very connected gay dudes high up in the gay underground. And somehow or other, David Berkowitz is like right in the middle of all this. He's hanging out with Roy Cohn, apparently, according to Maury Terry, going to Roy Cohn's house for parties. And so I was wondering if you had any insight into that, because it seems rather strange that this kid from Co-op City, who you knew as a normal kid, is all of a sudden in the middle of this Operation Together business.
I had no knowledge. I'm going to guess that occurred between 73 and 77.
Right.
Again, I was out of the picture. I was, laid off from the city, working upstate, working undercover. I had no contact with them other than that one meeting in 75 before I got laid off. Never heard that connection. No. And
right.
During the period that we were friends, there was absolutely no indication. Absolutely none.
All right, Gary.
Hey, Manny.
Hey, Gary.
How you doing?
Good. Is this Gary? Hey, this is our Gary. So John, Gary is a member of the crowd who also was best friends with one of the Son of Sam victims, Valentina Suriani in the Bronx, who Dave killed by his own admission. Gary, who's a great friend of ours and who's been on a couple of our videos so far, he was best friends with Valentina. So Gary, if you have any questions.
Yeah, no, I had Manny. I had no intention of joining in. I just wanted to watch, and I got to tell you, John, thank you so much for coming forward. We're so happy we found Maria, and then in turn found you. So thank you really for coming forward with all the history.
Gary, David became a really bad guy, and he should always be remembered for everything bad that he did. But when I heard all these stories about his childhood, and that was all nonsense, and really it didn't really come out in the papers, or at least anything I remember, where they talked about what happened in the military. Right. So when Manny contacted me, I said I really have no problem talking about this. I'm not one to talk about the dead, okay, but if we're going to talk about them, then let's know everything about them. And if there's more to know, then we need to find out also. Let's get down to the bottom of this.
Right. Well, when I was watching, I just planned on watching, and as I'm watching, I'm riveted. I'm absolutely riveted.
Thank you.
But I was just curious. I'm trying to maybe, and I can ask Manny too. I don't know if either of you have an idea. I'm trying to follow what you said about you seeing Dave on Webster and Fordham Road, which I know that intersection very well. And he seemed normal, and then comes in this Pat O'Shaughnessy.
Yeah. No, Pat did not join us for lunch. No. John, another Yonkers cop,
okay,
who lived on the block, joined us. No, Pat did not join us. No.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand everything. So Pat O'Shaughnessy is somebody that came after that possibly got Dave involved in the cult, or we don't know, or I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah,
to get
Gary,
the connection here.
That's an excellent point. Nobody ever thought that maybe it was Pat that was the connection between Yonkers and the Bronx. So we need to flesh this out, John.
I have no clue, by the way, but that's a good theory.
Right. But when did Pat become a Yonkers cop?
I can find out. I don't know.
All right. So these are definitely, Gary, excellent point.
This is what I'm seeing. Okay, so John has lunch with Dave, and this is around 75.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in 75, he gets involved with these people, John Carr, Michael Carr. So I'm trying to connect where he met them, how he met them, how these people, and if Dave is such, he's obviously a clear thinking guy from what you're describing, how does he get turned over? How does he get influenced by these people to do some of the horrible things, or at least watch some of the horrible things that went on in this cult, and then that turned into the Son of Sam killings? And I even mentioned to Manny, because of the the sketches that none of them really exactly looked like David.
True.
I told Manny, you know, Manny, I'm probably wrong. I mean, I still believe he did the Bronx shootings, but Manny and I did a video, and I mentioned to him, and it was like off the top of my head right then and there, that a 5 to 10% chance that Dave didn't do any killings, that he was just a lookout or a getaway, or just there. Because at each shooting there was, I think, what, Manny, about 4 people approximately,
give or take.
yeah. So I'm just trying to make the connection. Here Dave comes back from the army. He's off the drugs, or so he says. He's clean, and then all of a sudden he gets involved with this cult. I for the life of me would love to know how that happened.
Well,
I don't know, John, if you had any thoughts on that.
I can't answer in particular how that happened with Dave, but let's remember, this man got burnt out really bad on drugs in the military. Now, when I bumped into him, yeah, he sounded good. He said he straightened himself out, and he may not have been on drugs anymore. But that sure doesn't mean his mind was the mind of a sane person at that time. And if it was, I mean, look, my experience in police work, I spent a lot of time in narcotics, and I've dealt with people who had kicked the habit, gone back to the habit, kicked the habit, and we could tell they're a changed person. And also often very, when you're hooked on anything, it could be drugs, religion, anything. If your mind is a little weak, you can get sucked right back into something like that. And that may just be the case here, a psychological issue from his mind being weakened from the drugs and getting sucked back into religion, but in this case, devil worshiping.
Devil worship.
That's a good point. So that makes sense. That makes sense. I sure would like to know exactly how the transition happened.
Well, we're gonna find out. Hopefully, Gary. Hopefully, somebody's gonna come forward and put because look how many puzzle pieces John put in tonight for us. I mean, this is amazing.
Sean, again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm so happy we got Maria. I don't know if I'm not going to retread it because Manny probably gave you the little background about how we got Maria. It was a total fluke because of my puppy. So
yeah, Gary got us all. Isn't that ironic?
Together.
John and Gary, thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind seeing yourself
out,
I'm
gonna get out of here and let Eric.
Right. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary. Eric, 1 second. Yeah, John, Gary it was amazing because think of the degrees of separation. So Gary's best friend Valentina gets killed by David Berkowitz, and then 50 years later, Gary's having a play date with his puppy, and Maria's puppy comes in and they become friends. And Maria was good friends with David Berkowitz. I mean, it's just insane how these things are coming together.
Well, I just got to tell you this. I don't want to say any names right now, but in 1984, I got promoted to sergeant, and they took me out of the Bronx, out of narcotics, and they put me in the 3-2 precinct in Harlem. And after 6 months, you have to be transferred. So they give you 6 months to embarrass yourself as a new supervisor and then transfer you. Well, they sent me to the 2-8, and I get assigned a squad, maybe 10 men and women in the squad. And one of the men in my squad, and we never discussed it back then, his sister was one of the victims of Berkowitz.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we never discussed it. I don't want to say any names.
There seems to be so there just seems to be so many degrees of separation in New York City. Well, I mean, it seems like almost everyone has a story, and I found that to be true when I started diving into this story as a researcher back in earnest in 2003. I just found like all of a sudden everybody I met had an intense story for me.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna take our last Zoomer today with much appreciation, and of course, many apologies to those still waiting. Maybe we'll get a part 2 going for John one of these upcoming weeks or months. But for now, Eric Galati, the great Eric Galati, is going to be our last Zoomer. So Eric,
can you hear me?
We can, and welcome. You don't want to be seen?
Chief, oh sure, I want to be seen. How do I do that?
Press video.
Okay. Oh wait, can you see me now? Yeah.
There we can.
Chief Comparetto, God bless you, overwhelming. You're
Thank
a
you.
great contribution, and I really mean that. I'm not saying, as we say in Italian, I'm not paying you compliments just to put you on.
Thank you.
I have to ask one question first that Vice Detective Jim Boots Martin Rothstein asked me to ask you. Where were you stationed in the New York Police Department?
Well, a lot of places. In 70, I graduated the academy in 74, and I was in the 4-6 precinct in the Bronx. After the layoffs, I came back to the 4-6 precinct. Then I went to narcotics, street enforcement unit, which is no longer there, worked out of the 2-3. Then I went to Bronx narcotics. In 84, I made sergeant. I worked in the 3-2 and the 2-8. And then they put me in Manhattan South narcotics. I then went back up on my own. I transferred to Bronx narcotics. In 89, I made lieutenant. And I was fortunate enough, usually you have to go back to patrol, but I was an experienced narco guy and the boss liked me. And I stayed in narcotics. I did a year in Manhattan North narcotics. I went back up to the Bronx. The inspector requested me up there. And then in 91, my last 91 to 99, I was in the DEA Drug Enforcement Task Force. I retired out of there in 99.
Oh, great career. Now, before I get to the detectives, you went to high school with David Berkowitz?
No. I went to Brooklyn Tech. When I moved to the Bronx in 1970, I was a senior in Brooklyn Tech. I met Dave through the crowd, through the guys there. He was a junior in Columbus.
Okay, this is a question I have. There's a man who investigates a lot of occult groups. He was not a part of any satanic groups, but he's very erudite. The year he graduated from Berkowitz's high school is the first year for Berkowitz, but he knew Berkowitz's friends, never Berkowitz, and the whole ambient of occultists and Satanists. It was rife at that time. Did you ever know Peter Lavender?
No, I don't know that name.
No. Okay. So I want to get to something. This is something that hit me. There was a detective you said who interviewed David Berkowitz when he was incarcerated, and they arrested him.
Yes.
This is the only other time I've heard of a detective really getting hit hard by this case since Chinotti, but he's not named. And Rothstein, who was not specifically Son of Sam, but knew the outer circles, he broadens the case for us to show us it was just a media front for everything else going on. Do you know the name of that detective who was arrested?
Manny, you have that name? I saw that.
Well, we were talking about, the way that you described it, it sounded like you were talking about Detective Chinotti.
He never interviewed Berkowitz after he.
Right. That's what was confusing to me.
Yeah.
The way I'm only going, when I watched the Netflix special, they talked and showed a detective who had gone into the cells and had become friends with Berkowitz and then allegedly had leaked something to the media and got fired. Tell me.
Are you talking about Bill Phillips? The guy who was involved with the whistleblower cop who they ended up framing and sending to jail?
No, it wasn't Bill Phillips.
We're not going to find this out now, Eric. We have to do a little bit more research
the other
on that.
question is this: did you ever know of the forensic detective Michael Caine? Now, there's 7 ways of pronouncing the family name Caine, because he's the first known law enforcement officer to go meet Rothstein in Lindenhurst at the Surfside 3 Marina in Lindenhurst on Wellwood Avenue, where Rothstein used to hang out. And he came to Rothstein and said, "Hey, Jim, you know those killings that are going on there? It's not one man. We've got a serial killer on our hands." Did you ever know of this forensic detective Caine?
I did not. It doesn't surprise me. The city wanted the panic to end. They knew when they arrested Berkowitz, they knew the cult, the rest of his cult had moved out west. As far as they were concerned, it was over. I did not know him, but it substantiates the conversations, my peers, that we were having this whole time. That
Right,
there wasn't like one person.
Right. It seemed like that was the rumor going around the entire police force.
When they say the cult moved out west, I think they're referring to the Church of the Process.
Right. The Process, which became the Best Friends Animal Society, which
Rothstein had known about.
Right.
And I want to ask you this question. You know, we could all know one person, and that one person relates to us differently. I Is it not possible that the Reverend Don Dickerson saw things differently with Berkowitz than you did that you never knew?
Sure, 100%. Oh, no, I won't disagree with that.
And also,
yeah.
I come from a small hamlet, Meadowmere Park. 17 homes were burnt down, I found out years later, in Maya Harbor, a beautiful village that they were supposed to build something on, and they made the people leave. It was like a fairy tale village across Rockaway Boulevard, Rockaway Turnpike. I later learned that it was two childhood friends of mine. I never knew they did those fires. So it is possible. I'm not trying to be scheming, that Berkowitz could have been doing fires, and even though as intimate as you are, you never knew he was burning down these fires and so forth.
Look,
starting
there's
this
no
fire.
doubt. I'm not going to disagree with that. I can only tell you that we would be together when we were all together. We were together, and fires would come in, and we'd go to it in Co-op City, in particular. You know, when we were doing the Co-op City thing, and I mean, unless he started it 3-4 hours earlier, and now just somebody reported it, could it be? Sure, 100%. You know, I have friends who said that Berkowitz was starting fires.
There's one last thing I'd like to say. It's interesting they shipped him to Korea. Now, when war is on, all soldiers do not necessarily go to the war. But a lot in the military, people at war or out of war, it's a great, great aqueduct for narcotics during the drug culture, just as sure as in society itself.
Sure.
But it's strange that he was way up there in Korea, near the border. And do you suspect, have you ever suspected some type of mind control program took place with him? That's what Rothstein has been at the back of his mind. He's always said, I want to know what happened to him in the military that changed him.
You know, I had never looked at that possible angle. There's always been talk about the government doing mind control experiments and everything. I really never looked at that because based on his letters, let's remember, he was very upset that the government he loved allowed this to happen with the North Koreans firing, you know, over to not shoot their bottles and a GI getting wounded. And you never heard about it. They covered it up. And it really troubled him that you couldn't even load your gun and get even with them. And that bothered him. So, you know, mind control like experiments didn't come in even into my thought because he was finding a way to deal with something upsetting him and he turned to drugs.
One last question. Did you ever suspect that the people in the police department, because now we know they did, wanted to cover this up and get it over with quickly?
Oh, 1,000%. Yes, 1,000%.
Okay, well, God bless you. I could ask a
Thank
million
you.
and one questions. It's overwhelming, but you are more than a plus to the investigation.
Glad I could help. And you know, Manny, I mean,
Yeah.
I pretty much talked about all my knowledge with that, but one day, if you'd like, we can do one with just questions and answers. And if I don't know, I don't know. I can only help you so much.
Listen, John, given the fact that we have several people waiting right now in the waiting room and more people seem to be joining in every minute, I think that that's definitely something we're going to do. But we're going to leave this here today, folks, because we've gone for an hour and a half. That was the fastest hour and a half in my life. We've gotten quite a lot of information. I do want to announce that for subscribers only, we have had prior talks about this. This is going to be on Subscribestar only. John has agreed. Maria has agreed. We're going to have a three-way conversation. We're going to have me, John, and Maria meet together where we can all sort of compare notes as well. And, you know, it's always good to get people talking, especially people who haven't seen each other in 50 years, because you never know what's going to come out of discussions like that. And of course, John, if you that offer is very, very gracious, and I plan to take you up on it to come back for a second where we can do questions and answers, because just judging there's almost 400 people watching now, just judging by the sheer amount of activity in the chat, I think that we could probably go for easily another hour and a half if we chose to, but we are not going to today. So John, any last words for the audience before we all say goodbye?
Well, let's keep digging and everybody have a great new year. Let's hope 2022 is better than 2021.
Oh, I don't see how it couldn't be, but then again, with these people in control, you never know. So anyway, guys, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in today. This was an awesome episode. I want to say thank you so much to John Comparetto for joining us, and of course for everybody for watching, and for the people for participating. And we will be seeing you guys on the next live stream. Thank you so much.
God bless you.